Hey, folks, and welcome to the Deconstructor of Fun podcast. In this episode, I sit down with Dennis Fong, who's the CEO and co founder of GGWP, to explore his truly extraordinary journey from being the world's first professional gamer, winning John Carmichael's Ferrari in like 1999, I believe, to becoming a serial entrepreneur who's built 4 companies and sold those 4 companies, the GGWP being his fifth one. We will delve into Dennis's motivation, challenges, and insights on culture building, securing funding, and overcoming doubts. Dennis offers a lot of valuable advice to founders. He talks about the importance of open conversation and the realities of making tough decisions as a founder and a CEO, things like pivots and layoffs. Additionally, of course, we discuss his latest company, GGWP, their mission to create a safe online communities, the success with the leading companies that they've been having, as well as the opportunities that you may have at GGWP should you be looking for those. Overall, it was a true pleasure to talk to Dennis. I did not know of his super impressive background before we started this podcast, so I was really taken back. I think he's one of the most, if not the most, successful founder we've had on the podcast. I mean, at least in top 5. I'm sure that folks interested in entrepreneurship and company building are fascinated by this podcast episode. And before I bring Dennis Fong on, a minor small request. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, it would be really great if you could subscribe to the show. We're trying to grow our YouTube count so that we can make more on-site interviews like we did with Voodoo, like we did with Company X that is dropping out soon, and like we will be doing with other big companies. The more subscribers we have, the better and more interesting guests we can get, and the more insightful content we can bring your way. We've crossed 2 million listens on this podcast, so huge thanks for everybody tuning in. And we want to get a little bit more views to bring more of these amazing guests. So anyway, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dennis Fong. Yeah, we actually started rolling. It's about well, we could go 3 hours. I'm just kidding. Don't be worried. So let me just introduce Dennis Fong to the audience. If you're fine with that, Dennis.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Dennis, you're a CEO and a co-founder of GGWP, which is a next-generation content moderation solution that uses multi-model AI to identify and respond to harmful and disruptive behaviors in online games and services. And this is not your first rodeo, not your second, not your third. It's actually your 5th one. So originally, you started a company called Gamers.com, which you sold back in 97. So we don't need to even talk about who you sold it to. Then you started and sold Xfire to MTV Networks. Then after Xfire, you started and sold Lithium Technologies to private equity. And before GGWP, you started and sold Raptor to Take-Two. So this is the 5th company, or technically actually your 6th company that you restarted. And what keeps you going? Like sorry, I'll just have to say, when we got first connected, I didn't know about you, and then you told me a little bit in a call, and I'm like, this is like the most successful founder I've talked to. I've talked to many. Like you're in the like top 5. So what keeps you going?
That's very kind of you to say, but hardly. I think for me, frankly, I just get a little bit bored these days. I've tried playing games in kind of in a retired state, so to speak, and I just don't find it very life to be like that interesting without having something that I'm really passionate about. Even going back to my very first company that I started, it was really never about the economics. It's just I'm one of those that kind of, if there's something that's bothering me or I'm frustrated with in my life, and my life has largely been around games almost my entire life. I'm one of those guys that just goes, hey, why don't I just try to go do something to solve this frustration of mine. So most of the companies that I've started actually were a result of something that I was just frustrated in my personal life. And, I'm just one of those guys that goes and does something about it.
Yeah. So, which is exactly how an entrepreneur does it. So they identify a problem and try to solve it. And so, talk to me about the problems that you've been solving. So, gamers.com, what problem did you identify, and what did you solve with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not even sure if you know my whole history in gaming. So
No.
I was, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the first professional gamer.
Oh wow.
I was a world champion of Doom, Quake, Quake 2, Quake 3. I retired when Quake 3, shortly after Quake 3 came out, because I was busy running a company in parallel. I won John Carmack's Ferrari in a Quake tournament in 1997.
Wow.
And so, and just as the TLDR of how that all happened, basically, when I was in high school, I mean, I was playing games like everybody else, and I was basically the best player in Doom, but the audience was pretty small, but hung out in IRC and stuff, right? And won a bunch of tournaments, won the first kind of real esports tournament, which was in 1995. It was coincided with the launch of Windows 95. So it was actually a worldwide tournament where they found the winners of, within each region. So we'll call it San Francisco, London, France, et cetera. And then they flew the top 20 winners to Microsoft headquarters, which was this huge kind of Windows launch event. And I ended up winning that tournament. And it was called Deathmatch 95.
Yeah.
And there's a
Makes
funny
sense.
video of Bill Gates in like kind of virtually placed in Doom, that you could find on YouTube around this event. But basically, after I won that event, the Wall Street Journal called me and they're like, "Hey, dude, we heard we're writing the story about online gaming." Mind you, this is again 1995 or 96 or something like that. And they're like, "Hey, we heard you're the best. Is it cool if we just follow you around for a day just to see what your life is like? To better understand this world." And I was just a kid, right? So I had no idea who the Wall Street Journal was actually, and I thought so little of it because I was living at my parents' house that I forgot that I even had an interview with the Wall Street Journal. Right? The guy showed up at my house at like 9 a.m. and I was like, "Dude, who are you? Like, you just booked me up, man. Come back." And he was very gracious and did. And I didn't even tell my parents about it because I was like, "Oh, I don't even know who these guys are. Like, whatever." But anyway, to make a long story short, he ended up writing a story that ended up on the front page above the fold of the Wall Street Journal. And the center of the story was actually about me. And I had one of those little pixelated, drawings of me, on the front page. And basically from that day, literally that day, I started getting calls and emails from corporations saying, "Hey, can we sponsor you?" And within a year, I was making over 150,000 a year just from sponsorships. Again, this is the 90s, right? So a long time
95,
ago.
which is like a lot of money back then.
Yeah. I was doing consulting. I was paid like $15,000 to show up at a trade show and blah, blah, blah. So that was really the start of, I guess, in some ways, my entrepreneurial journey. I was just a kid in high school. And then, I ended up winning. I was undefeated for 5 years. So from 95 to 2000, I was the champion of all those it games. But in 1996, I started Gamers.com with my brother. And the idea was we just looked around the internet. We're like, dude, the gaming sites that are online right now suck. Like, they're not written by gamers, blah, blah, blah. And so we're like, hey, and I was effectively one of the first influencers on the internet because I had effectively a blog that a lot of people followed. I had a monthly column in PC Gamer. I wrote the official Quake 2 strategy guide. I was fresh, right? So people just followed me because, I was the champion of, probably the most popular game at the time. And so it helped launch the website. And it started pretty humbly. It was basically, I wrote what we called the Quake strategy Bible. It was basically all the tips and tricks. Like people didn't even know what rocket jumping was at the time, right? Like they didn't know how to use audio cues to understand where your opponents were, and blah 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 blah. And that's why I won everything at the times. It was still the early days of understanding of how to truly be good at first person shooters. And so we used that as basically a launch pad, and used money I was making from sponsorships and tournaments and stuff to start the first company, which was during my first semester in college. And then both my brother and I dropped out. I was CEO, my brother was CTO, and we basically fumbled our way through a very fortunate time to be starting a tech company, which is the original .com boom, right? In the 90s.
Yes.
So, I blinked and basically we had raised $10 million. I was CEO. I was like 19. Blinked again, and the company was like 130 employees, making millions of dollars. And that's how we ended up selling it. It was just a lot of luck and timing, being in the right place, right time. It was so early, we basically went online and just registered gamers.com, and it was available, so like
And you've heard of Heroic Labs by now, and we keep talking about them because in today's mature market, you need every edge to be successful. Rather than spending those precious company dollars on building game tech, focus on building your game and shipping it. Get into your players' hands faster and grow your community. Heroic Labs is battle-tested partner and friend of the podcast. Their tech enables you to be flexible, creative, and scale for success. Heroic Labs has your tech stack covered. Whether you're looking for a world-class back-end game server, an amazing game development framework, fantastic live ops tooling, or reliable mass scalability, Heroic Labs has solutions for all of these challenges. And it's not just us at Deconstructor of Fun praising Heroic Labs. The company works with some of the world's biggest publishers on many of the beloved games. Focus on your game, save a big chunk of cheese, and avoid tech risks with Heroic Labs. This podcast is brought to you by Xfire. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter Xfire, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With Xfire, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they interact with your app. Xfire, where your app's potential meets performance. And you sold it before the .com bust, right?
That's right, yeah.
Wow.
And Gamers.com was not like, it started as obviously like, as I said, like a Quake Bible kind of thing, but it grew to a place where you could go create your own community on Gamers.com. So we had like thousands and thousands of communities, some that were related to gaming, but some it was like, whatever, the Christian club, you can go there. It's like, it was forums and, reputation and, a bunch of other stuff. And it's actually what led to the second company because, especially in those days, the CTO, CIOs of a lot of big companies were gamers. That was my foray into, I wasn't really into computers before gaming, right? And probably the same story for a lot of us. And so, probably once a quarter, like a CIO of like a big company would email me and be like, hey, we love the technology, the software that, like that you're running on gamers.com. I'm part of this community there. Can I license it for, my website? And we're like, dude, we're a gaming company. Like, don't bother us. And so we got to a point where we were starting to get offers, acquisition offers for gamers.com. And it seemed like most of the acquirers were really interested in the traffic and the eyeballs more so than the actual tech. Because we were one of the biggest, if not the biggest gaming site on the internet by eyeballs and traffic at the time. And so my brother and I, I was like, hey, look, I think maybe we could actually spin our platform team out. And maybe I could try to pre-sell this stuff. And, maybe we could sell it to a company that doesn't care about the platform and doesn't even care if we come along with it. They just want the eyeballs. So that was basically the initial idea for Lithium. Was like, okay, we can take this platform and maybe we can sell it as something different. And it wasn't called SaaS at the time. This is in 2000. So it's exactly what I did. I went to these people that were calling us, and I said, "Hey, look, you've been asking for well over a year about licensing our software. We're doing it." And they're like, "Great, that's awesome. Like, how much do we pay? Like,
Oh, wow.
give you $1 million for this, license and stuff." And we're like, "Well, we wanted it to be like essentially break even or profitable on day one because we wanted to spin out about 20 some odd people from the platform team." Again, we were just making shit up, to be honest. We're like, "Okay, look, we're not gonna. You don't need to pay $1 million, but we're going to charge you kind of like a monthly fee, and charge you more the more successful it is for you." What they call SaaS now. Obviously, we didn't even call it SaaS at the time. So we kind of like fake door started a company, and then I basically pre-sold it to Dell and PlayStation. So Dell and PlayStation were our first two customers. We powered all of their customer-facing community software for well over a decade, and we were basically break-even / profitable on the day that we started the company when we spun it out. So we sold gamers, started Lithium, and off we went. So it's really just by accident, to be honest, that we even ended up in that business. But yeah, that's kind of the story of the first two.
And how about Xfire and Raptor?
So with Xfire, so the Lithium journey ended up being taking well over a decade. It's enterprise software. I mean, we powered the communities for everyone from AT&T, Google, Cisco, PayPal, all the way to Nintendo, PlayStation, EA, Ubisoft, etc. But I'm a gamer at heart, and I really want to get back into gaming. So about halfway through that journey of building Lithium, I basically talked to my brother, and I was like, "Hey, look, I want to go do something. I want to do something else. Why don't you take over as CEO?" And then I basically started Xfire, what became Xfire. And I started with a few other co-founders. Interestingly, like the first idea that we started the company around was actually not called Xfire at all. It was called Ultimate Arena. It was like a skill-based gaming, but around like Counter-Strike and Unreal and Quake. So like you can basically bet against each other for money. Extremely challenging business. We tried it for a couple of years, almost 2 years, just basically hit a wall. We're like, there's not enough luck in this. And I should have known because, obviously I was a pro gamer. But we had basically like, I think maybe 6 months, 9 months of runway left. Mind you, this was an incredibly experienced founding team. Like one of my co-founders, he had previously sold a company for $500 million. My other co-founder founded a VC that was very successful, and he after Xfire became the first VP of marketing at Google. And then created Google Capital. Like so, stacked team, but we again, when you have a bad idea, you just have a bad idea. One of the learnings of entrepreneurship, right? And so we're running out of money. This is not working. We need to come up with a new idea. A lot of us were gamers, and we're like, hey, one of the big frustrations for us at the time, so this is in 2003-ish, 2003, was like the way that we played games like Counter-Strike and Quake and stuff. I don't know if you remember the day of having server browsers where you would go to like Games by Arcade or something. You'd pick a server. And then when you find the server, even if you and I wanted to play together, I would have, once I log in, I get the IP address and port number. I have to cut and paste it, all tab out of the game, get on AOL Instant Messenger, send it to you, or IRC, paste it, and then you would try to connect. And you couldn't message each other in game because, there was no in-game overlay technology or any of that stuff. So everyone used AOL Instant Messenger or Yahoo Instant Messenger, which, if you remember, when you get those messages, it would blink. So if you're playing a full screen game, it would pop you out of the game. So if you're like in the middle of like playing, a very intense moment, like someone messages you, you're like, fuck. You have to, it steals the focus from the game. And so we're like, hey, look, this seems like a huge problem. It seems weird. uh, you know, gaming is more about playing with friends and it's more about social. It seems ass backwards that you have to find a server and then get your friends to get on it versus like being able to join your friends with a click, being able to see what game they're playing and blah, blah, blah. So that was the idea. We're like, well, we got nothing better to do because we know that the Ultimate Arena idea is dead. So we effectively built Xfire in a few months because we were running out of money. We shipped it. We had no other choice. And lucky for us, it stuck and it was viral. And within a few months, we had something like 500,000 users, which for those days was big. And on the backs of that, we were able to raise more money to survive. And then I think about a year and a half later, we were acquired by MTV Viacom for about 130 million.
Wow.
But yeah, we were on the brink of death basically, and just that's often the story, right?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. I mean, every startup has that kind of journey, right? So
yeah.
I mean, that's I think it was fun, but and at Xfire we basically were Discord in the 2000s. We invented we literally invented in-game overlays. There was no such thing before us, Steam or nothing had any of this stuff. We invented a buddy list where you could see what game your friend is playing, which is obviously standard now. One-click join, so like being able to click on your friend's name and just click join, and you join whatever server they're on. That didn't exist before us. We had a whole bunch of stuff. For anyone that's listening that was old school gamer would remember that we basically invented in the 2000s. But I think we sold it maybe too early, which is maybe another discussion. But when you're on the brink of death and you're only like 12 employees, and you start getting offers for north of $100 million.
Yeah, that's insane.
Less than 2 years after you're on the brink of death, you can't help but just be like, hey, maybe it's a good idea to take the money. Which is what we did. But anyway, it's awesome to see where Discord is now, because that what coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yeah. Well, they're also highly unprofitable, to my understanding.
Well, they've done a lot of really incredible things, and I think we certainly were we kind of got up on the wave, if you're using surfing as an analogy. But whether we would have stayed on that wave, or the wave changed dramatically in terms of how people engage with games, and all that kind of stuff, right? So whether we could have shifted appropriately, who knows? Unlike
and so those three companies, Gamer, Xfire, and Lithium Technologies, all bootstrapped, right?
No, we raised money we ended up raising money for all of them. Gamers.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah,
started
10 million.
bootstrapped.
Yes.
Yeah. And then once we had success, then we raised money to kind of supercharge it.
Yes.
And Lithium, and we ended up raising probably close to $100 million or something like that.
Oh wow.
It ended up becoming a pretty big company. But yeah, I mean, and for me, I think I still see today a lot of founders, that they celebrate raising money as being like this huge win. But to be honest, I've never really looked at it that way. It's like you just set the bar you're much higher to that you have to reach for success, and it's really the start of your journey now, or a restart of your journey rather than the end game.
Right, and especially a lot of founders like there's there are big funds that are doing small checks. Let's put it that way. And when you take a small check from a big fund, you still get, treated to those standards that now you have to return quite significantly for it to make any sense for that big fund to really even work with you. So you're putting your bar so incredibly high, especially the ones who are celebrating like, the first check coming in from, you name it, A16Z, Benchmark, Lightspeed, like any of these like big funds, like that bar is going to be so high that it's like a multiple unicorns that you have to, hit in
Yeah.
the head.
And it's interesting, especially for the big funds, if they're writing that first check or writing a small check. This is something that I think a lot of founders don't really understand, is that there's also potentially signaling issues if they don't lead the next round, right? It's because
Yes.
this is a huge fund. Like a $500,000 check or $1 million check or a $2 million check is not really, like that type of, especially if they were like, a minority or a co-lead or something like in your last round. If they're not leading your next round, which is usually the one that's much harder to raise, it's
Hmm.
not the seed or the pre-seed. It's usually the A. That's the
Yes, the
that's
A.
the hardest.
That's the
It potentially is a signaling issue for other firms saying, okay, yeah, you're this big fund, you have inside look at this company. Why aren't you leading it if it's so hot, right? So it's just one of those variables you kind of have to think about, in advance, and so it's not always good to get like three big funds to all write a $1 million check in your pre-seed or seed, right? Because if all three don't lead or don't give you a term sheet the next round to lead, then for everybody else it's kind of like, oh wait, they know what's going on, like why aren't they putting in money, right?
Yeah, yeah. They're like, oh, we're gonna follow. This is not really, going to the. It's not really in our playbook. Like, it's a little bit different. It pivoted, so we're just gonna pro rata that stuff. We're just gonna we're just gonna ride along. Somebody else can take the lead on this, and then like, okay, this is not apparently the unicorn that they were thinking in the beginning. So yeah, you get discounted pretty hard at that point.
That's right. Now, I mean, the flip side is, like, as a big fund, they're usually very, very good about taking their pro rata,
Hmm.
right? Not taking the pro rata is even worse, right? Uh, and some of the smaller funds will not take; they'll just be like, "Yeah, we're out,"
Yeah, when they reach a certain limit, like at Series A, after that, they're just gonna ride along because the check sizes are so big.
yeah. I mean, that's more understandable, but there's certainly funds, and I'm not going to name names, but that if they don't, they just won't. If they don't see it tracking, they'll just be like, look, we're going to opt out of even taking our pro rata, which is a horrible sign for new investors, right? So these are all kind of the questions as founders, as you think about investors and who you want to be at the table with you, or in the trenches with you. It's
Hmm.
it's important what their reputation is and how they act, both in good times and in bad times.
Yeah, and you've had so much experience in this. So how do you evaluate the funds? So you probably, I mean, looking at your companies, and looking at you as a founder, just objectively, as I said, like one of the most successful founders any fund can be connected to. So of course they're lining up. And that has been happening to you almost since the beginning because Gamers.com did so well, and then your second one and the third one. So how have you evolved in evaluating the investors as a founder?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I've worked with Excel, Benchmark, Founders Fund, NEA, DFJ, uh, with GGWP, Bigcraft, Makers, Griffin, and then a bunch of
The who's who.
corporates,
Yeah.
right? And it's interesting you asked that question because I live in the Silicon Valley. I I've worked with many Silicon Valley funds. I'm an LP in many of personally in a lot of the Silicon Valley funds, and they do incredibly well. But gaming is interesting because it's such a unique industry. And I think the thing that I learned, having started multiple companies, most in gaming, but some kind of one SaaS company,
Hmm.
is that a lot of the Silicon Valley funds don't truly. They're not. They're almost. Maybe it's a little bit better now, but certainly historically, they're more like passerby gaming investors. Like, most would do one gaming investment, maybe a year, once every 1 or 2 years.
When it
Uh,
heats up.
yeah, right. And so they were never really fully connected to that part. So a lot of the value that they provide is kind of the pattern recognition when you are starting to scale. That was incredibly valuable. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, we were seed investors in Uber, right? And we saw it grow from nothing to whatever $1 zillion, and you should be thinking about X, Y, and Z because like we see you on a some type of trajectory, and they've seen it over and over and over, right? So that's super helpful. And then the brand name is helpful both for raising follow-on rounds. It's like, oh wow, whatever. X is an investor, and also hiring executives who care about the Silicon Valley, right? They're like, oh, okay, this is a top tier fund. I want to be part of that portfolio.
Interesting.
But in gaming, it's what really matters, especially for GGWP, where we're selling to studios and publishers and stuff. It's like relationships and evangelism with studios and publishers, and that's where a lot of VCs, not again, some are doing much better at it these days than before. If that's what's valuable, then we want to take money and work with funds that are funding the potential next Epics and Riots of the world. Right, which is why we took money from not just one gaming VC, but pretty much all of them at the time, which was Big Craft Makers, Griffin, three of the top kind of funds that are dedicated exclusively to games.
Yes.
It was for that reason. And for GGWP also, I have two co-founders that are also very experienced founders. One of my co-founders is Kuhn, who was the founder CEO of Crunchyroll, which he built for 12 years before selling it to Sony for like $1 billion, right? And George, our CTO, who had previously started an AI company that he sold for a few $100 million. So we've all like built and scaled companies. We know like the trials and tribulations, and so like we don't really need the typical help of like, hey, you should think about like X, Y, and Z as you're scaling. We've all built companies of hundreds of people. So that also again, we're maybe a little bit unique compared to other startups, but we value people that are really tapped into the gaming ecosystem.
Got it. And so what do you value specifically? Like, what does it mean to be tapped into the connections or the network?
Yeah, look, I mean, so I think if I take a step back, every company is hard and unique and different, no matter how many times you've done it, right? I know you've started companies before as well. It's like, it's fucking hard every single time.
It's horrible.
There's only a couple things that, even if the fifth time or however many times you've done it, it gets easier. The first one is getting the first round of funding. Funding in general is easier when you have a track record, right? So basically with a phone call, we can get money. And the second one is recruiting your founding team of people, not just founders, right? But like the
core
engineers,
team.
Yeah, the core team. Because all of us, we just pick up the bat phone from people that we worked with before. Call up the rock stars, be like, hey, come on over, right? And we can pay them a lot less. One of our principal machine learning engineers, he probably was making 7 figures at wherever he was, and he came over because he just wanted to work with one of George, because they worked together previously, right? So that's the advantage. Everything else is just really freaking hard. You still have to find product market fit and all that kind of stuff. And so, given our space, which is broadly kind of content moderation, and you're coming from gaming companies historically that effectively spent zero or close to zero, right? Like everyone understands customer support, right? So which is like a problem a user has with the company, maybe account billing, account got hacked or whatever. But when you're talking about like player to player interactions, like the player to player experience, which is basically what moderation is involved in, most companies historically spent zero on it. We've met companies before we started, big ones, and I'm not going to name them, but some of the biggest games in the world. We're like, okay, well, how do you deal with this? They're like, oh, you players can report other players for bad behavior. Okay, great. Well, what percentage of those reports that are filed do you respond to? And you'll be shocked at how many of them said zero.
Oh, wow. Sounds like LinkedIn.
Like literally zero. And I would say the average was like less than 0.1% of the reports that are filed are responded to. So it's like this huge black hole. They're like, look, honestly, we just have that in there to enable players to vent. right? Like, oh, this guy was being a jerk to me, he was harassing me or whatever, and it's just a way to vent, but they don't actually do anything about it. So we knew that this business was going to be tough, because when you're coming from a state where a company is spending close to zero, it shows with dollars that they don't value it, right? Or they don't understand its impact. Which is that now we actually have data, like 10 to 15% of player churn in multiplayer games is directly as a result of toxicity that players experience, right? Like the most memorable part of most gaming experiences are those that you have with other players. And that's also the case when you have a negative encounter with another player. Like people, there's been plenty of data and research that shows like 75% of players have quit playing a game permanently because of harassment that they receive from another player. So companies need to do a better job, and it affects not just churn and retention, user acquisition. Like how many friends do you know that are afraid to pick up a MOBA because they know how the reputation that community has in terms of how welcoming they are to new players, right? And so there's all this data that's out there, but nothing speaks the truth more than where people spend money and where people choose to spend money, right? So we know, like, okay, most companies are not spending much in this. So if you're trying to build a company and business around it, we need a lot of evangelists. We need people. Everyone knows, toxicity is bad. We want to solve it. We want to protect our players and blah, blah, blah. But, like, again, actions speak louder than words. And we knew that it was far from ideal. And so we wanted investors and people that are connected to the company that spoke to publishers and developers and studios on a regular basis, where they could potentially help evangelize the importance of this. Not even from a GGWP perspective, but just from a, hey, look, you really need to pay attention to this because this is a serious issue that's affecting your bottom line. And that's not just with incumbents, the big AAAs of the world, but also the AAs and the indies and the future Epics and Riots. And so, we found our partners in that with, the funds that we mentioned, along with a lot of our friends in the space, right? So the founders of Riot are investors, founders of Twitch, founders of YouTube, founders of, whatever, the list is quite long, but, people do care deeply about this. And so we just needed a lot of allies. And that's kind of how we made our decision of who to bring along for the ride.
Step into the future of game monetization with Exola. Exola empowers developers and publishers to market, sell, connect, and optimize their games globally. From payment solution to a full suite of tools designed to grow your game's revenue while fostering a loyal player base. Exola is your game's gateway to worldwide success. With Exola, the world is your playground. Visit Exola.com today and find all the solutions that will help you to power your games into success everywhere. This podcast is brought to you by Data AI. Now, you're asking, didn't they get acquired by Sensor Tower? They did, and that's awesome. Here's why. Whether you loved using Data.ai or Sensor Tower, the combined company will offer customers even stronger and more detailed insights on the full digital customer journey. Exciting times lie ahead as Sensor Tower and Data AI join forces. Go to data.ai or sensortower.com and get on board with undeniably the best data partner in the business. Now, back to the episode. Got it. So basically looking at the funds and who are their LPs and what kind of a investment team or they could bring along, and through that get the influence in the industry. And that is what you need to get the first set of traction going, where this problem is being recognized. And once the problem is being recognized, then you can start offering the solution for that problem.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's started a company knows that first sale often is the hardest. It takes the longest. Our first sale took about a year, but our last sale took a couple of weeks. We now power and kind of help protect and nurture the player experience for dozens of in some of the biggest games in the world, right? But it took it took a lot of consistent evangelism to help open people's eyes at like, hey, there's this problem that I don't think you fully understand. Um, Let me help you understand it, right? And ideally, they're not hearing it just from us; they're hearing it from a lot of different people. And once they hear it enough, and you're talking at, it usually has to happen at kind of the C-suite or at least a senior executive
Yes,
level. Then they're
of
like,
course.
because we're not trying to get $10,000, right? It's a big problem. Then you can kind of get over the hump, and once you convince them, then it makes everything else a lot easier.
Yeah, you're selling it's an investment. Through this, you don't have to acquire as many users, or you're retaining your users better. So it's an investment into user retention, which again is a massive thing if you have a big game, a multiplayer game, when people are enjoying each other's company, especially when you get rid of the toxic players who are actually like a cancer in the game when they're destroying other players. So it's a good to identify and remove those, or hinder them down, so that the whole community benefits from them, and that is direct dollars.
That's right. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of actual company building and stuff, as I said, it's just as hard every single time, right?
And, and so there's a few questions I have here, like, well, the core team is pretty understandable, so you usually try to bring in the people you've worked with before, who the founding team has worked with before. But how about your founding team? Like, how did you, like, of course, your first founding team was your brother. That's a pretty good connection. Not likely that you're not going to see eye to eye, and if you want to fight, that's nothing new. You can fight easily, even
That's right.
punch, and things will be fine. They're just brothers. But how about with like, how has your approach towards a founding team evolved, and how do you basically build an aligned founding team?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because the last few companies, it was like a new founding team every single time.
Yeah.
Some people just choose to pursue other interests, right, and stuff. Um, I think it's almost like a marriage. You have to continue working at it. And even though, with GGWP as an example, I met Kuhn, when he first started Crunchyroll, so 10, 12 years ago. Um, but still, I mean, I think nothing's quite like working with someone to really truly understand,
Yes,
right?
knowing
Going through the
somebody and
fire.
working with somebody is a little bit different thing.
Totally. So yeah, I mean, yeah, even for us, um, there's, I mean, I would say we're still figuring it out, to be honest. Because I would say when we first started, we gave each other almost too much space because, like, look, I know you know your shit, I know my
Yeah,
shit, so just you know what I mean, like, too much
you
respect. I in
you
some
you
ways.
created silos. You created silos.
Yeah, it's like, look, I respect you. I respect
Yeah,
what you've done. You respect what I've done. So I'm not gonna speak up maybe in some instances where I normally would because I'm like, look, I just trust you. But trust and respect and stuff, all of it ultimately has to be earned. And it has to be earned through going through tough circumstances, right? Or debates and arguments. And honestly, I don't think we had enough tough arguments or debates early on, and then we realized, like, dude, what are we doing? Like just speak up. Like we need to. If you disagree, just tell me, right? So I think, again, every founding story has its challenges, and that was certainly one that we wrestled with early. Was just giving each other a little bit too much respect. In some cases where we're not having debates, having arguments and debates are actually really healthy. Um, and so we just weren't having enough of them. And so, yeah, that was definitely something that I've never experienced before.
yeah. So you're kind of like in that sort of a forming phase where you formed the team and everybody was there, but didn't go to the storming phase. Like, just didn't want to like venture there out of respect, right?
Part of it was also, I think, COVID. So we literally started the company
Oh,
during COVID.
mm-hmm.
So, we weren't all in the same building, and, it's first for all of us to be remote first as a company, or remote only, really. So, given that most of us had not worked together before, and we're not sharing the
Wow.
same space, and spending 12 hours a day together in office and the kind of stuff, and so much you learn just through osmosis and hanging out, and water cooled talk, etc. Right? So I think we missed
Yeah.
all of that, and that all helps gel, and and a team kind of come together to understand each other better at a more kind of I guess innate level. So I think that contributed to it as well. And maybe looking back, that was probably one of the big contributors of it
Mhm.
because,
It's
yeah.
it's so helpful, Dennis, for you to say this because I did the same mistakes, and I'm not a successful founder, not even close like you, and yet you did this mistake after like on your fifth company. Not mistake, but this kind of like we're gonna start a company during COVID. Yes, done that, and also I'm gonna work with people who I know but haven't worked with, and we're gonna do it remotely for the most of the time. And of course, that leads to a lot of problems. But you being so successful and it makes me feel good that I'm not actually that big of an idiot because I've made the same mistake. And if you've made the same mistake,
uh, uh, Too, we
so
make
thank you for
mistakes every single day, man. I mean,
yeah,
that's what entrepreneurship is about, is making mistakes,
yeah,
right?
yeah. But it's a weird thing, like being a startup CEO or CTO or whatnot, is because you have that title, then people assume that you know everything. I mean, you're the CEO, like of course you. And then oftentimes, like myself and most of the people are like first time CEOs, and so you don't know. You're literally learning on the job, and then everybody expects you to know everything. And then, as you said, there's a it's interesting to hear from you is like you don't have a secret recipe for how to form a founding team that gels from the first day. Like you have to go through all the same phases like everybody else, and that is a quite a combo for a startup entrepreneur, is like raising money, uh forming a founding team, properly forming, so it's not some crew that left another company and then started together, and then really learning your new job as a startup CEO or startup whatever C.
Yeah, and that's it. Not even. I mean, that's all about company building, but
Yeah, and then there's a product
building.
market fit that
Yeah,
is missing.
exactly. And
And
that
like
even
money
that.
is running out because you're not making money.
Yeah, I mean, product market fit is really the hardest thing at the end of the
Yeah,
day, because having product market fit solves all of those things that we just talked about. Like people will figure
right?
shit out. They will come together even if they hate each other, if you have product market fit and you have a successful company. And I think
Yes.
the best analogy I've heard recently was something that Mark Pincus said, which is that entrepreneurship is a lot like surfing, where founders think that they can create waves, but you
Hmm.
can't. We can't. The best founders can never. You can't create the wave. All you can do is spot it early, so you can get better at spotting a wave that's coming early, and then you get a little bit better at paddling it out ahead of the wave, and then riding the wave
Standing.
when
Yeah.
standing and riding it, right. And all of that's just pattern recognition, or stuff that we've done. We have a lot of reps doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I-
it's just as hard. Like sometimes people spot the wave, but they're 20 years too early, right? So,
yeah, and,
like they
and
were
like
right.
like
They were
yourself.
right.
Yeah, like yourself, you're talking about, Xfire being like kind of like the Discord, but before Discord, and maybe you should have held on to it for it to
It's 20
become
years. Yeah,
like,
20. I mean,
yeah,
20 years early, basically.
yes, yeah. Another thing that comes to my mind. So I've been reading this book, Up Down Up, by Kim Nordstrom. So Kim is like a former, I think he was chief strategy officer of Paradox. He was heading a studio at King, and then he worked also at PlayStation. So very senior executive, like super nice guy. Here out of Sweden. He wrote this book, Up, Down, Up, and interviewed, I think, like 100 different founder executives. And it's kind of like the deepest notion of that book is really about like starting off with a strong culture. And how do you proceed? Because you said now is like the most important thing is product market fit, getting getting to that situation where you know you have a product market fit, you're making money, you're signing clients, everything else will come together. And then kind of reading that book, it was more about like it's more important to start with focus purely on the culture and the sort of the meaning, the why, and so forth, and then that work leads to a good sustaining company. So a little bit of a like, am I understanding that those are different approaches, or like how do you see it?
No, I don't think they're I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that's ideal, absolutely.
Hmm.
Kind of understanding the why, getting everyone on the same page, having a culture where it's a safe space to disagree,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which a lot of cultures don't have, or so like having that trust and respect, and again safe spaces, and being having a lot of empathy, within the organization. All of that stuff I think absolutely matters. But I've also seen companies and have friends that have companies where it was a shit show internally, but they still crushed it because they had the right thing, and it's it doesn't matter how much of a shit show it is if you're making tens of millions of dollars a month or whatever, right? Success does heal most wounds when it comes to that. But look, the honest truth is like the majority of us will never have, you know, be lucky enough to be in a position where you have this product that's just absolutely crushing it, right, in the
Yeah.
first place. So yeah, I think absolutely the culture matters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting topic. I agree. I agree with those, and I don't know if they're mutually exclusive. I don't think they are, and I don't think Kim is saying in any way that they would be mutually exclusive, the product market fit and the culture. It's just in my limited experience working with different founders and being one myself, is like I've noticed that sometimes when the focus switches too early on too much of Simon Sinek stuff, then you're like, hey, 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 like I understand that you listen to podcasts with the CEO of Walmart, but there's a little bit of a different type of a problem. Like we need to get to a point where you're making money and you are actually alive, and then we can spend more time on figuring the why, because the why is like the product market fit. Like you need to get this product out, and the why can actually change. Like you said, there are always pivots, not always, but very often a pivot that can be quite fundamental in the company, and the whole why can even change, and the new success can come in. Like Discord is a great example, because that was a game company that was making a MOBA and then pivoted because they made this tool that was successful, and the MOBA was not. I played it a lot, Fates Forever, and they pivoted into a highly successful company. So whatever the sort of a forming and the building that they did earlier on is like they didn't have the product market fit, and that now is a totally different company and a totally new set of values and so forth. So I'm kind of having like I'm always thinking about this. I'm always thinking that early on you should really laser focus on the product market fit and getting to a sustainable position, whether it's through rise of sales and something that allows you to raise more capital, or just turn profitable, and just focus on the culture of being about execution and about reaching the target, about understanding that that is the most important. We're doing all the things for us to function extremely well. And then as you get to the cruising altitude or the growth altitude, now you're growing your company. And now is the time to really focus on the culture, because you're bringing more people in and you don't want to break this machine that you've built, this execution machine. So let's talk about it. Let's build the guardrails, the values that allow us to sustain what we've had till day while we significantly grow in size. Like, am I off? Like, this is
Totally.
kind of like my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I think some of the mistakes that I see, and it's hard to argue that it's even a mistake, but I've seen companies that I've been involved in or advised or invested in where they hear about, like, say something like Supercell's culture, which is obviously quite famous. Small teams, like, I mean, like a lot of autonomy and more or less flat. And they're like, that sounds awesome. Like we should aspire to be like that, which
Hmm.
totally makes sense. Like, I get it. But I think a lot of folks from the industry didn't come from cultures like that, even at successful companies, right?
No.
And so they came up with a more traditional culture where whatever, like the leaders just tell you what to do and blah blah blah. I'm not saying one's better than the other, or arguing the benefits or the cons of each one's, but when you're if you aspire to be one way, but all of your experience and your team's experience is another type of culture, that could be challenging in and of itself,
Yeah.
because you're trying to figure out how to be this like it's great to aspire to be like this, but it's going to slow you down potentially. And again, I think it's perfectly fine to aspire to do it, but I think if the whole team doesn't have experience being that, even though it wants to be that, there's going to be some inefficiencies built in just because you don't, like it's not the traditional way of doing things that you're used to, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is that's a perfect example. I think Supercell Culture is a perfect example in the sense that um, it's a culture that so many companies have tried to mimic without actually knowing what the culture really is. So they've heard about it from PR, comms. Like it's not I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying like you've never been there. You've never experienced. You don't even have anybody working at your company from Supercell to tell you what it is. So you have a fable. And now based on that fable, you are literally creating a company culture. And the worst thing is you don't even know how this fable was born. Like you haven't even spent the time to understanding how these founders ended up building this type of a culture that they are talking about. And when they're talking about, of course, they're going to talk about it in the most positive way because it's a company, it's branding, it's employer branding, it's company branding. It's also the vision that the founder sets of, I want this culture to be like this. And it's, I would assume, and to my understanding and to my knowledge with, for example, Supercell, it is very close to that. But of course, what the founder says and the CEO says is more of like the vision rather than the everyday truth, And anyway, the problem is like they don't understand how that company got into that. Like, what were the companies they worked with before? What were the inspiration for this culture? For example, like in Supercell, it was Netflix culture book. Like the founder really loved it, and the whole team loved it. So they built from that. They built from their previous experience of typical American company with multiple different studios, and that evolved into this type of a culture that they then perfected for like over a decade to be what it is. And then does somebody say, "Hey, I read a blog post." I think that's exactly what we should pivot our like 1,000 people company or 100 people company or even 15 people company without knowing anything. It's almost like, like in medieval times they were drawing giraffes based on somebody who told them what a giraffe would look like.
Totally. No, that's right. And the reality is the culture is ultimately made up of the people.
Yeah.
And so if the majority of the people on your team don't understand the intricacies of that culture, it's really hard to adopt it.
Yeah.
Even if you aspire to do it, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. But at the same time, I think what Supercell doing is fantastic, especially the CEO blog posts and so forth, because even though that culture, what he writes, even though it might not be, 100% factual at that point, but by writing and putting it out there where the whole company reads it, he's pushing the company to that direction. He's literally setting that direction publicly. Like this is what we are. This is what is, what we aspire for. This is the type of behavior we are. This is our value. Like putting all those things in, it's just solidifying the culture where he wants to take it, and he eventually takes it with methodologically through this. And so you have to understand it also from that perspective. Like these are, this is you're watching the culture being shaped. It's not a ready-made product, and you can just pick and choose or take that from it. Same thing happened, by the way, with the Culture Inc. When people read the Ed Catmull's book, and then everybody started having these brain trusts and so forth. Also, did not work, like because they didn't have Pixar culture, and they took a tool from there.
that's right. Yeah, I think you nailed it dead on. Which is it. Look, I look up to people who aspire, to because that level of transparency that Supercell has, and that level of trust and respect, and as I said, I think almost the number one thing in any culture is being able to create a safe space where people feel okay to share and talk about their failures, and to have meaningfully differing views on a particular topic, and it be totally okay, and it doesn't go off the rails, right? I think all of those are things that we should all aspire to have within our cultures, but to actually execute it is much more difficult than people realize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Do you think so? This is something that I've been kind of like mulling over, and then it was I was talking to anyways, I'm gonna ask you this straight up. So do you think a good leader is also a good manager, and do they have to be both?
As a good leader, Is a good leader also a good manager? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
yes. I think most good leaders are good managers, but
Hmm.
I think part of it depends on the organization of the company, right? Because you have, I don't know, I'm just going to pick maybe an extreme example, and it may not even be a fair characterization, but someone like Steve Jobs at Apple
Yeah, I
was,
was thinking about that.
right,
Like
known
an
to be
extreme version.
extreme
Extreme version.
version. I mean, I think he's pretty extreme already from folks that I know that worked with him, but I mean, he's very charismatic, visionary leader.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I think it's questionable whether he was a good manager.
I think he was an awful manager, based
Yeah,
on
that's,
based on everything that. So that's why I'm asking the question. Like you took the most extreme, and that is the correct, a choice of people to discuss. And this kind of came to me because I was talking about a certain leader in gaming, um, extremely successful, founder, CEO, and so forth. And this kind of came up as well, where he was, to the people close to him, he was described as incredibly inspirational leader. Just, you'd love working with him, but also a not good manager. Like really not a good people manager. Not like a Steve Jobs way of like being an awful person, but just like failing to really manage a team, a leadership team, and making like everything that goes into that boring management stuff. Then that was a problematic, like mining for conflict, doing all the boring steps. But then again, setting a vision, getting all the important things done, like the strategy, the vision, that then talking to the investors and getting people into the company. Like those were perfect, but the management side was weak. So I'm just curious to ask you, because you're
well,
started so many companies.
I guess so I think my answer was a little bit vague because I've seen plenty of friends who are incredible managers also be incredible leaders, CEOs.
Uh-huh.
Um, Often, though, that's like I would say most often when I'm thinking through my list of my friends, it's like an engineer or someone with a technical background that ended up becoming a CEO founder. And I think it's a lot easier for them to learn CEO visionary strategy fundraising stuff than the other way around.
Hmm.
And so, I have seen basically them being in a single individual. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just speaking personally, like, again, I started my first company when I was, whatever, 18.
Yeah.
And didn't have a ton of mentorship. So I just learned through making mistakes. And I would say definitely the first company, my understanding of what it meant to be a leader and CEO was not right. I mean, I had the part where it's like, first in, last out, but, like I remember, I think even to this day, I still feel like I actually don't love the CEO job. I think it's very lonely.
Yeah,
Even though
I
I have a
don't know
lot of
who
friends that are
loves it.
founders and stuff, it's still like, it's not something that I necessarily enjoy a ton. Or not that I don't, I definitely enjoy parts of it, obviously, but there's parts of it that I don't enjoy as much. And when I was, my first company and even maybe my second one to some extent, like I felt very lonely. And, I thought, it's like take all prisoners, like just take no prisoners, just charge, like win at all costs. I'm going to drag you over the finish
Yeah,
line.
Gordon
Um,
Gecko style.
yeah, I was kind of like, I think one of the things that I did have, or do have as a founder and as a gamer, really is really good intuition.
Hmm.
So, what I realized was maybe, if there's a problem or a question that we're wrestling with as a company, uh, maybe I can go from A to P almost instantly with just a little bit of context. I can just jump straight to like something, and I'm not getting all the way to Z, but sometimes, but most
Hmm.
I can jump ahead. But not everyone's brain works that way. Some people are really good, but they need to understand A, B, C, D, like every point along the way. And I think when I was running my first company, especially, I just wouldn't have the patience because I'm like, dude, just if we're dealing with something, it's like, look, the answer is P. Just take it from P and go from there. And then, people are like, what the fuck? Like, how did you get there? I'm like, just trust me. And, look,
Yeah.
most of the time I was right. I'm not right every time, but most of the time I was right. But, I also, it's not easy for me to explain how
Hmm.
I understood that it was going from A to P instantly. And I didn't have the patience.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, I think that was very tough for me because I think early on in my career, I thought it was a strength. I was like pretty proud of like, hey, I could walk into a room, sit in a meeting, and then within, whatever, 10 minutes, I can tell you the answer or get close to telling you the answer and figure it
Yeah.
out. Right. But that's not how you build good culture. It's not how you build good teams. And it's not how you, help build great people.
Yeah.
Some people do need mentorship, or they just. I didn't realize that people thought differently than me, right? Because I was so young, especially. It's like, oh
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
I thought how I see the world is how everyone sees the world. Like, why can't you see the world the same way that I can? Um, so I struggled with that, and I still struggle with that even now. I'm definitely a lot better and much more mindful of it now. Um, but I still have the internal strife of like, oh man, I wish I could just tell them the answer right now.
I
But I'm purposely holding back because I'm like, look, it's much better if they go and make a mistake, so that they can learn from it. Because we'll need these people later. Maybe a year from now, they've leveled up now where I don't need to do this, but I have to let them, take the path. And of course, sometimes they're right and I was wrong too. So I'm not saying
yeah.
that I'm always right, but that internal dialogue for me is something I even to this day constantly battle.
But there's a phases for that. I think saying that like there are phases in a company where you can make mistakes, and there are phases where you can't let somebody go astray because you are in charge of this company. It is on you, and it has to get to a stable state as soon as possible, find that market fit and so forth. So in those situations, I think it is correct to be the sort of a not good manager, but a strong leader and just push through because you know what's going on. But then you get into the phase of you're in a more stable position and you're focusing on building the culture so that you can actually start scaling, build the values, and really at that point you can afford to let your feet off the gas pedal a little bit, allow people to to explore, to make mistakes, to really form as a team, and I think just there's different phases. And I know that there are some larger companies where the CEO is still acting like this is 20 people company and they have to make all the calls all the time. I think that's problematic. But
Yeah,
also if you're in that 20 people company and you're trying to find a product market fit and the CEO is acting like this is 1,000 person company that is generating stable revenue, that's also wrong. So I think
yeah,
there's a switch that you need to hit.
totally. Um, and I would say probably that my single biggest lesson of learning what it means to be a founder or a good leader is that it's totally okay to be vulnerable. It's totally okay to be wrong. And that's one of the things that I just didn't know when I was early, right? That I always had to be the one that was strong. I always had to be positive and optimistic for the company and blah blah blah. But that's not how vulnerability and empathy is actually how you build relationships. Going through hard things with other people is how and admitting that you're wrong when you're wrong is actually how you build trust and respect and earn people's respect. And that's something that took me a long time to learn. And to be honest, again, it's one of those things as a founder, I still learn. I'm still learning every day how to better be vulnerable. But yeah, my first company, I just didn't allow myself to feel that and didn't allow myself to show it. And I think it actually made the job even more lonely.
Hmm.
And like it didn't allow me to build the kind of relationships that I'm able to build, better able to build now. Um, so this. I mean, that's why you asked me at the beginning why I keep doing this. Honestly, that's part of why is to me learning, whether it's like learning a new game and becoming like one of the best, if not the best at it, which is what drove me kind of in the early days as a pro gamer. To
Yeah.
now, like the learning part of it, when you're kind of in that learning process and you're feeling yourself level up and you're feeling like oh, I understand myself better now. I understand this
Yeah.
game, whether it's a business company or actual game. Like that part of it is the most fun for me. So I love being a noob coming in, no expectations. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my ass kicked for, for hours on end, but I know I care enough and I'm competitive enough that I'm going to just keep playing. I'm going to keep at it until I'm good. And entrepreneurship, companies, culture are things that you can never truly win.
Yeah.
Because every combination of personalities and people just changes the dynamic so much that you kind of have to like relearn it all over again. And even though it's challenging, it's also really fun and rewarding at the same time, especially if you have something at the end of the journey where, there's some success, right? A pot at the end of the rainbow, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of look back and be like, wow, we went through some shit together, but
Yeah.
I think it was worth it. Not just for the financial outcome, but for what we went through and the relationships that we built along the way.
Yeah. Perseverance. I have two questions, just two pretty, before I let you go, I need to ask this. So how did you overcome the doubts that as a founder you must have in every single company? I mean, one was literally going out of business, but like, what's your, how did you overcome it? Or like, what's your advice for other founders to overcome the doubts that they most likely have every second day?
Um, so I think number one, it's totally normal to have doubts. Um, I still have doubts every day, so it's not abnormal. You shouldn't feel less confident about what you're doing just because you're doubting. I think it's actually healthy to be questioning. Are we doing the right thing? And to have conversations with the team. Again, that goes back to some of the vulnerability as well. Like, hey, are we working on the right thing? Like, do we really believe in our thesis that this thing is going to be worth X, Y, and Z? Or should we be pivoting or tackling something else? I think so. How to actually deal with that, other than founder therapy, which is talking to other founders, and that's part of, I think, how anyone, you should have a network of friends and people that you, or advisors or board members or whatever, that you can count on, that you can have these vulnerable conversations with, but also to sanity check that hey, look, are we working on the right thing? I think, obviously we all have finite time on this planet, and as well with runway. Are we working on the right thing? Is our thesis still correct? And if it's not, to be able to have those transparent and honest conversations about, hey, like, well, okay, if we're not working on the right thing, what should we do? Should we be pivoting? Should we shut down the company? I mean, I've had friends that raised $15-20 million, a few $1 million in. They're like, our thesis was just totally wrong. And the founding team came together because we wanted to work on this. And we've decided just to return the money. So instead of pivoting, they're just like, hey, look, it's just not the right thing. So here's your money. Not whatever they had left. So maybe 12 out of the 15. But it's still, it's a big deal. It's like, hey, look, we were just wrong. And I have other friends that have pivoted 30 times. Like they just keep trying stuff. Even they see moderate success. It's like not breakout success. And they're like, hey, look, they will send an investor email. We're shutting down this idea. We're going to work on a new thing. We're laying out the team. Now we're working on this. And they've literally done it like, there's someone I know that literally has done it like, he did it like 15 or 20 times before they finally found the right thing and sold it for whatever, $100 million. Right.
Oh, wow.
But, it's hard to be like that nimble and that flexible in your thinking. It's impressive to me if you're able to do that, and to have a culture and team that's willing to do that.
They really live the lean startup book.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the hardest thing with being a founder is making the hard decisions, which means like layoffs, which obviously it's a really tough time in their industry right now, but like it's sometimes what you need to survive. And it's hard. And those are the parts that suck of being a manager and a leader is when you have to do those things.
Yeah.
I've gone through it several times in my career, having to lay off people from the company. And so it's super tough.
Yeah. I've done a few, not as many. Last question. What is success for you? Because I mean, it's not clearly monetary. Like you're still in the gutter, in the trenches, just trying to make this happen. But how do you define success?
I think now especially with what we're working on with GGWP. Um, there's another motivation there that I didn't honestly have in my previous companies, which is literally like we're trying to make the world a better place, right? We're trying to make the internet a safer place. And even in failure, if we have, meaning like we are not able to convince the biggest games in the world to use us, they just choose to build it themselves, which is fine. Like if we motivated them to get off their ass, to spend the resources and take it seriously, and to make the internet a safer place for us and for our kids, like that's a win for me. Now, not a win for our investors, obviously. But that's certainly a win. The social impact part of it is a big reason why actually the three founders, we all got into it in the first place. But for me, I'm built a little bit differently than I think the average person, where I'm hyper competitive. Once I'm going to use poker as an analogy. Like once I buy into a game, even if the game is like $100 buy-in, once I'm in, they just become chips to me, and I just want to win. And there literally is a poker game that I play with a lot of successful founder friends of mine. We literally buy in for $100, and we'll drink like thousands of dollars worth of wine and whiskey and stuff, right? But I just care whether and I've played in the World Series. Like I'm really into poker, and so like. But yeah, I care just as much whether it's $100 or like $10,000, right? And that's just how I'm built. So if you're asking me like what does success look like, it does mean building a successful company, having a successful outcome. But there's just extra bonus for this one in particular because of what we're working on, and the impact, the social impact if we're successful.
Yeah, I'm glad you followed it up with that poker analogy and how competitive you are, because altruism is a great bonus, but it's like I think I wouldn't say that it's a gate. I don't know, maybe for a founder, like you need that fire, you need that chip on the shoulder. You definitely have it. So I would say I wouldn't have believed the altruism angle. Like that would be the only one. I'd be like, nah, that sounds like bullshit. But you followed it by like, I just want to win. Like I found this thing and it's not working, and I'm gonna make internet a better place. Like I'm gonna make internet better, and I'm gonna win, and that's it. So.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I think I still hustled like my first company.
Yeah.
Like I was, just at Dice. I had like 30-minute meetings back to back, basically for 4 straight days. Right? It's just how I'm built. Right? That's what you got to do to be successful, because it's as we talked about earlier, it's hard every single time, and you have to work just as hard, and no one's going to give you anything for free.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, on that note, I think I want to thank you for jumping in on the podcast. This was really interesting conversation. I have to say, like I've been as of late talking to more and more like really successful founders, and y'all are all crazy. I mean, it's just like like not only on podcasts, but even outside the podcast. Like the thing that you mentioned, I still hustle like it's my first like my first company. I have the same thing with another founder that I'm kind of close to. He does not have to do it, and then I give him some feedback, and he would send a pitch like a deck back at like 3 a.m. I was like, he hasn't, and like what? It's amazing, and it's really amazing, and he's just like working super hard and trying to make this new thing happen, and it's really admirable, and that kind of goes into like there are people that think that the founder lifestyle, the founder CEO startup is like worth the interesting or cool or this and that, but it's a hell of a grind, and it really takes specific people who do it over and over and over again, like yourself. So I think it was a very valuable conversation for a lot of people to listen and really think if they want to do this or not.
It's definitely not a glamorous life, like I think
No.
that the PR and stuff makes it out to be, but that's okay. Again,
Yeah.
I think anything that's worth doing is hard, right?
Yeah.
The most rewarding things you do usually are the most challenging, the things that test you the most. And so I think
Of
that's
course.
at the end of the day why I keep doing it, because it's always so hard. But that's part of what makes it kind of fun in a whatever a different way.
Makes you feel alive.
That's right.
Dennis, GGWP. So how can people get in touch with your team, your product, and are you looking to hire? Like, what's the next step for GGWP?
Yeah, we're scaling. We've seen good success in the market. We have some of the biggest games in the world that are now using us. And so, yeah, if you're a studio that needs help with creating more positive communities,
More
that's
retention
right.
with
Less churn, higher retention,
yeah.
better user acquisition. You should reach out. You can go to ggwp.com where you can reach out to us. And we also have a bunch of positions that we're hiring for as well. So, if you fit in any of those, please apply as well.
Yeah, there's folks in from GGWP in our Deconstructor Fund Slack channel, so you can reach out to them as well. Anyway, Dennis, it was a pleasure. I think I'll see you in GDC.
For sure. Good.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you again, Dennis.
See you later.